All right, we'll wait a second for everyone to trickle in. It's like got a couple more. All right, looks like that's mostly everyone right there. Well, hey everyone. I know depending on where you are. I'm in the East Coast right now, and it's a little bit late, so glad to have you all here. Uh, my name is Ilesh J. I'll do a little bio and everything in a quick second before you do an office hours. But before we get started, the whole kind of point of this today is to really let you ask whatever questions on top of your mind. My goal is to be as an open book as much as possible, from the interview process, life as a consultant, what you had for dinner, literally anything's on the table. I want to be as helpful as possible. What we're gonna do is we'll use the chat for questions, and if I see a question that I might not necessarily fully understand, I might ask you to kind of come off mute, just to I can clarify what you're asking. But otherwise, we'll use chat. Another thing, if you see someone in the chat ask a question that you think is relevant to you as well, just plus one it. That way, I know that, hey, plus I'll prioritize that one because it's on top of multiple people's mind. But before we get into questions, want to get started with a quick intro on myself. Kind of give a little introduction on who I am, what I'm up to right now. So I'm Ilesh. I grew up in Ohio in the Columbus area. I went down to school for my undergrad at Georgia Tech. Uh, did industrial engineering down there, go Jackets, and then I ended up staying in Atlanta at BCG doing strategy consulting. Classic strategy consulting was really all over the place in terms of being a generalist, but by the end of it, really found my home from an industry wise in travel and tourism, and functionally in the marketing, sales, and pricing group at BCG in Atlanta. And then I mentioned the bottom right there. And while I was at Tech, I did boutique consulting as well, working for this company on the Crystal Group, doing organizational behavior consulting, which is not very industrial engineering at all on paper, but had a really good time there and happy to talk about that experience as well for those of y'all looking on the boutique consulting route. Right now, I'm on a little hiatus from BCG at Kellogg at Northwestern in Evanston, getting my MBA and MS in design innovation through the Triple M program there. And this summer, I'm in between my first and second year interning. I'm a big sports guy. I want to work in sports eventually. I'm interning with the baseball team here in DC, the Washington Nationals, and a business strategy analytics intern, your classic internal consulting role. So, like I said, big sports guy. Happy to always talk about it. For the next, I know we started a little bit late. Happy to end a little bit late as well. I'm gonna check clock. It's like 9:10. We can go to like up to like 9:40. For those who want to stick around for 10 minutes longer. Like I said earlier, this is an open Q&A. We'll talk through on the left-hand side some of the application and kind of what the process looks like. If you have questions on that, on the right-hand side, I included things like what the day in the life looks like, what's the consulting culture. Sometimes I know the common question I always get, like, is it really 60 hours a week every single week? And it can be. And then what does life look like from a mobility perspective, both within consulting, and then how does consulting set you up in other roles after? Because oftentimes consulting is a pathway to something else, and I think a lot of consulting firms understand that. And last but not least, always ready to talk about sports. So with that said, we'll go straight to Q&A. The chat should be open, and you feel free to ask whatever in there. All right. I think, Don, I see your first question. I'm not gonna lie, I don't know what OC stands for. So if you're gonna put that in chat, what that may be, that would be helpful, or come off mute. But got it. Okay. I think for that question, so the question for Don, for if you missed it, was kind of what advice would you get for someone who was out, canceled, or let go and wants to get back into management consulting? I think there's no clear cut something from the books there in terms of what's the right thing to do. There's some firm specific nuances there, where some firms would be, hey, like if you were not in consulting before, and then you go like, oh, and I want to come back to something that's completely fine. But if you're like let's say I was at BCG, I got let go and coming back to BCG, that boomeranging is pretty much on non-existent. But my general advice would be there fair. This is just completely anecdotal and not me like knowing someone who's done there, but from what I would understand is it's not any different than what you would do otherwise when you're going to apply into a consulting company, which is kind of two things is talk about the impact you made since you've left consulting, for example, or whatever role you were in before, want to get back into consulting. That's probably the most important thing. I think people understand that career changes and what you do changes. And oftentimes the experience you can leverage from outside of consulting is invaluable to get back into consulting, especially if it's from a industry specific or expert specific role. So I know folks at BCG who were not at BCG initially really had a career in kind of marketing and sales and tech sales roles were one example. And then when they came to BCG, they had that industry experience that they could really rely on. And they went on that expert functional track. So in that case, if you found yourself in a separate situation and want to get back into consulting, a separate situation is a specific function, that's what I would lean into because a lot of these consulting companies are looking for functional expertise as well. So that'd be my one quick of advice, but I don't have anything too specific there. And that's something I would definitely reach out to folks at specific firms, especially the HR kind of who might be more in kind of understanding what that process might look like for someone who's going to try to get back into consulting. I'm going to keep on going down the list right here. So Stanley, you said, any trips to effectively prepare for the BCG Casey chatbot and pass it? Yeah, that's an interesting one because it's not, I think when you think of case consulting, you can work off body language and all things like that. You don't necessarily get a chance to do that with an AI chatbot. And for the folks that don't know kind of what the BCG chatbot look like, the first round for BCG is a behavioral interview plus this kind of AI written case, I would say, you do on a computer. The couple tips and trick, it's honestly surprisingly not too different from doing a real case. You're just kind of doing it either in this multiple choice / words section. So think about how you do the exact case. Like that structure is really key, how you think through, because there's some written portions how you write your answer the same way as you would speak it. The kind of tougher part about the online chatbot is that because you can't work out body language and there's kind of a right answer in some of those multiple choices, one thing to watch out for is that 5 answers might look all good. 1 answer looks pretty good. So that's something to just keep in mind in terms of preparing for it. I know for BCG, we give like a bunch of online practice cases so you can get super used to the platform and the format. The one thing is that time does pass quickly. I think it's you have to move on a little bit quick. And then the math section, no one can call you out if you might have missed a 0 somewhere. So if there's any sort of math, it's like you either get it right or get it wrong. There's no way to kind of recorrect yourself. The last part of the interview has to do is like almost a video recording recommendation. And that's your time to like really, really kind of stand out there because that's the one time you are live talking. As far as I know, unless things change in the last couple of years, where you're live talking into a mic, and that recommendation is the end of the case. So really kind of nailing that structure down on the recommendation. The same way you do a live case, recommendation, evidence, risk, next steps, however you want to do it, but really making sure they use that. I think they give about 1 minute to nail that is what I would make sure you focus on as well. And that's just kind of bringing your actual case skills in there. All right. Allison said, from your experience in consulting, I was wondering if you work on the execution process for the business, or is it more of developing the process for business to follow? This is extremely kind of dependent on the type of case that you do. There's kind of, with at least my experience at BCG and across different industries, both the industry and the length of the case will dictate kind of where you might be kind of playing into. So for example, I was working for a parcel, like a parcel delivery, parcel services company. And I was on that project for 10 months. I was doing a bunch of mini projects, but in that one, not only were we helping, hey, like there's a strategy for a very specific thing on like picking up that might increase operational efficiency. There's even execution where people were on the package cars and understanding like if we did this, what can we do, and kind of testing things. And so there's the execution process for sure. Similar thing, I was working on a hotel property experience case um, in Las Vegas for 6 months and trying to understand like this hotel was renovating, what would they do? There's a process to that, but really the bigger question for that one was like what kind of for the customers that we're trying to attract to this one specific hotel, what are they looking for? So we did a lot of focus groups. We stayed in pretty much every single hotel in Vegas to learn more, which sounds more glamorous than it is when you're living out of a suitcase for 3 weeks, just going from hotel to hotel on a weekday in Vegas. This is 2021, so kind of tail end of COVID. Um, so you're kind of playing that side of being more ingrained in the process. On the other hand, one of my projects was with a Coca-Cola bottler in the US, and it was a 5-year strategy project. So in that case, it's more of the latter, what you said, the process kind of oriented projects where I'm not sticking around for 5 years to make sure everything we say happens. What we're trying to do is establish a plan that they can execute on or they can build off of as they want to build on what they want their pricing team to do or what they want their operations supply chain team to do. So everyone has their preference there for sure. Some people like being closer to the ground level. Some people like the experience of kind of being more high level, but also kind of spreading themselves across a bunch of different things. And if you go the consulting route, you'll definitely see both in your time, and eventually you'll find that you like sticking on to one or the other, and kind of narrow yourself into that eventually. Okay, Francis, how to narrate a personal story during behavioral interview. All right, this is gonna sound like the most generic answer ever, but when I'm interviewing, that's what I'm looking for as well, is the STAR kind of format with the situation, task, action, result, definitely on the focus of the action and result. Um, what I'm looking for when I'm looking for people, or kind of helping people, is how can if you were in a situation, you were only 12 weeks in an organization, in this case, that's the average length of the consulting project, how have you made an impact as quickly as possible? Or in other words, how did you improve something or make something better than when you entered it? So when you left it, how do you make it better? So whether that's extracurriculars, if you're in school, or that's your internships or your jobs, like what did you do coming out of it that you can like that at the end of the day you can take credit for? The one thing about a personal story during behavioral interview is that this is might not exactly answering it, but the behavioral interview is the one way you can actually also show your personality. The case for sure a little bit, but at the end of the day, the case is a case. The same interviewer might give this 20 times the same exact case, but ideally they're only hearing one of you or one of your kind of story because it's unique to you, and that's where your personality comes through. So whether it's in situation you're like cracking a joke, or it's as long as it's professional, or you're gonna have like a little tagline about and like in your elevator pitch, I think that's really true to you, or even like the way you talk and smile and try to really make it a conversation. That is what I would focus on. Someone shouldn't come out of that talking to you after a behavioral interview being like, I feel like I learned nothing about this person, or this person just seems like they're really good at what they do, but I wouldn't want to work with them because they don't seem like the person I'd get alongside with. So it's really a balance of both. Again, the impact is important from a content perspective, but the way you deliver it and kind of letting yourself shine through, in my opinion, is just as more important, because at the end of the day, like if we're giving you the interview, or consulting interview, like the firms believe in you that, hey, like we think this person's qualified to do the job. What sets you apart is kind of like how would you fit into the company from a culture perspective, from a team perspective. If you're working with someone with 60 hours a week, you see a lot of the same people every single time. You might get stuck in the airport together or stuck at a client site late at night. Doing that, the personality part is extremely critical when that happens. All right, Erica, any advice from going to consulting for an engineering degree? How did you get in industry? What I'm going to say first, I did industrial engineering. For what those of you guys know, we call that imaginary engineering because it's not the most engineering. It's not the most real engineering. It's not building anything. But I know from my experience at BCG, a lot of my closest friends were, one guy was a biomedical engineer, one guy's in material science. So you have tons of folks coming from the more kind of hardcore sciencey engineerings. And the advice I would say is lean into it. You have an opportunity to talk about a strong quantitative background, and then can you bringing that into a business world, which I think is biased because I came from an engineering degree. So I think it's pretty critical that like you can get through data quickly. You can understand if you're a CS person, a computer science person, like what these like AI is a buzzword oftentimes, what AI actually means, or like what the usefulness can be for that specific company. So lean into like that blend between business acumen, technical acumen. And then how do I get in an industry? It's honestly, it's not anything like that crazy. It's you kind of apply into consulting, but again, that story is really important. The cool thing about consulting, especially in these general consulting companies, like your big three and big four companies, you got people from engineering, from business, from the liberal arts. What they're looking less for is one hardcore concrete skill, but more one, can you make an impact? We're talking the behavioral review. Two, do you know how to communicate your thoughts? That's where the case interview comes on the structure side. And three, are you willing to roll your sleeves up and get some work done? Slash ask the right questions. And I think that's pretty agnostic of what kind of degree you had. Again, you can use your degree to just craft your story. All right. None yet. Do you have any advice for non-MBA advanced degree candidate regarding when and how to apply and stand out? It's unclear the pathway and cycle. I want to say that's firm specific as well. I think there's definitely kind of design programs for some companies for non-MBA advanced degree candidates, whether it's masters or PhDs, especially in the PhD side. I know BCG has its own PhD recruiting pipeline. So does Bain and McKinsey. So like that's definitely there. On non-MBA master's programs, typically speaking, you apply as a general candidate. So not necessarily through college recruiting. But with that said, it never hurts to ask HR if you can apply to the general like student recruiting platform, which I think is generally the better way of applying if you have the opportunity to apply to student recruiting, because that's the main pipeline. And that's where they hire through the most. So I would say that's probably the best as to reach out to someone in HR recruiting. The cycle, if you apply student recruiting, be pretty similar. If it's not student recruiting, then it's relatively like an ongoing cycle. So sorry, that's a little half answer, but I think asking for help on that one is the right thing to do. All right, Jordan, have you interacted with sports as a consultant? Any projects or anything? Do you have any goals to work in sports with consulting? I'm gonna start with the last one first. Yeah, definitely want to work in sports after consulting. I'm here with the Nats, and my experience at BCG Atlanta was travel and tourism and marketing, sales and pricing, which are not sports but very adjacent to sports. In terms of interacting with sports, some firms interact more than the others. So Deloitte, for example, has probably the kind of largest kind of sports kind of practice in the US, at least, in terms of where they're hiring management consultants across stadium designs, your typical leagues, teams. McKinsey probably is the biggest one in MBB, but BCG and Bain also have a presence, some smaller than others. So those definitely exist. The trade-off I would say with sports is that oftentimes they're they're lower cost selling projects. So they're sometimes the more intense projects. Cool. Some might argue the cooler project because you're doing something that's super consumer facing, unique. It's also intense projects because they might be sometimes shorter staffed. In terms of projects, it's the one I can talk about because it's public is US's World Cup bid was actually a consortium of consulting groups, if I'm not mistaken. I know BCG was part of it, but US's World Cup bid, where they got the World Cup with Canada and Mexico 26, was done alongside consulting companies. All right. And I just lost where I was. Okay, Anushka. Okay, there's some two likes here as well. I've heard mixed opinions about this, but how important is a cover letter and should you be highlighting as a part of the application? If you have time, I would do a cover letter. It's not going to hurt you ever to do a cover letter unless you do something that's like, if your resume is like done really well for kind of part of my friendship, like if you half-ass the cover letter, then obviously I would say at that point, don't submit a cover letter because it's showing you're not trying. But it's always good to have a cover letter. I think for me, I always submitted one because it helped me kind of share my story a little bit more. Like I was saying earlier about the coming from engineering background as well, and I did a whole bunch of random stuff. I did org behavior consulting, supply chain. I helped design like a 3D prosthetic for I like my college experience was like, this sounds kind of cool. Let me do it. And then I didn't realize I had a plan until senior year of like, oh, this consulting thing sounds pretty cool. Um, so you can use a cover letter to kind of highlight that experience, your path a little bit if you think it's helpful. So if you have time, I would say kind of dedicate some time to it. But at the end of the day, if you feel like you're kind of between you're fighting for time between your resume and your interview prep and writing a cover letter, always I would prioritize the first two and then do a cover letter. Some firms don't even look at it. Some firms really, really look at it. And that knowledge is pretty kind of available online, what firms prioritize and what firms don't. So I would use that as to guide like how, where you should prioritize your time. And ideally, we can submit something for all of them that's firm specific. All right, Erica, how did you choose strategy consulting over other types of consulting? That's a great question because I ended up doing the other type of consulting, which was very specific org behavior consulting. McChrystal Group is 100% firm here in, it's close to me in DC in Alexandria, Virginia, so in Northern Virginia. About a 10-year-old company when I was interning with them 5 years ago in undergrad. I had an amazing time there. I got, because it's a smaller company, I got to meet tons of people. It felt kind of like a startup where it was all hands on deck oftentimes. I did some like leadership consulting workshops for sports clients with alongside my main client, which is the IT division of a healthcare insurance company. And I learned a lot by doing something like it. The trade-off for me was like, hey, like I don't know if that's all I want to do, org behavior, kind of consulting. So it's like for me, it's like where can I get a larger array of things, still surround myself with brilliant people, like I had at McChrystal, but still can I have not get can almost be in a niche because, like I said, I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and I was like, Orbeaver sounds cool, but I don't think this is exactly what I want to do in the long term. So that's where the more general consulting came through. And between strategy consulting, the different firms, I'm biased. I love BCG, but I would say the firm itself comes down to there's some firm specific nuances on like how much they travel or like their staffing structure. But really what it comes down to is who you connect to from a recruiting process. And for me, like I chose BCG purely because I really like the people I talked to. I kind of click with them the most. One of them became like he spent 4 or 5 hours because him and I clicked really well. He became like a mentor even before the interview process. And then he left as I had joined BCG, but even now we still keep in touch and he's doing amazing things in ed tech. But that's the kind of like I felt that from day one for me. So that's where I kind of lean towards. But strategy consulting just came down to casting a wider net of projects and experiences. All right, Charday. Hopefully I'm saying your name right. If you're transitioning to a consulting firm after working a few years in industry, can you do projects in that industry only? So only sports related consulting projects. This is again firm specific and track specific. So for some cases, so BCG has an expert track and a generalist consulting, the traditional track. So often, if you've come in from a lot of outside experience, you can actually recruit for the expert track, or they might ask you to recruit for the expert track. Like, hey, like you're really, really, you have tons of healthcare experience. We want you to focus on just healthcare. It's a different like promotion track in the early stages, and it kind of works up, but you only do those kind of cases. Other, and then it also comes down to like BCG doesn't have tons of sports related consulting projects, so that's not the only thing you'd be doing if you did sports, for example. Other firms might be a little bit different. You are very much tied to a practice from day one or really early in the process. So you do sometimes people say whether you like it or not, you might be doing that industry a lot. So the most common one across most firms is federal work. So the government work because it requires clearance sometimes. But just oftentimes once you start doing one federal project, you end up doing a bunch of federal projects. And those who definitely come from the government sector end up really going to federal project work because they understand it a lot better. So it's firm specific on how they decide the tracks or not, but you can recruit for a specific track if you want to, or just be a generalist for most companies. All right, this is a slightly loaded question, but I think a really important one. What is your tip for networking? I'm also look at time. Okay, we got 10 minutes, so I'll try to be. I'm not gonna get through all of these, but I'll get through how we can talk through some other specific questions in the next slide, just after this. But what is your tip for networking to get an invite for consulting interviews? It's gonna I would say it comes off as really obvious if you're trying to network and like just like by talking to every single possible person and you lose like the interest of not talking to someone new. So for networking, I would say talk to people that if you're reaching out to folks that you have some sort of connection with early on, or where you'd be genuinely interested in learning kind of what specific things they do. So if you see someone on LinkedIn that's from your university, talk to them because there's a connection there. You can like talk about how did their college experience prepare them for their consulting experience. If you see someone working in travel and tourism and it's like, hey, I'm really interested in learning about travel and tourism, talk to that person. So like networking with people you either have a connection or genuine interest about. But in general, with networking, it's like those tips are, I think, pretty standard across everyone, across any kind of conversation you're having. It's kind of come prepared with questions, but like let the conversation go where it goes. So oftentimes the best networking conversations are the ones where you actually only talk about work for 5 minutes, but everything else for another 25 minutes. It just means you're kind of connecting more. And like I said, consulting is just as much about the people part of it as it has the actual, if not more than the actual kind of the consulting work part of it. So like people are always assessing personalities. It's all for you. It's also important for you to assess other people's personalities. And that definitely comes through when you're kind of giving out invites for interviews or like maybe like invite only networking sessions. And the other thing I would say is like keep in touch. After don't like just talk to someone and like let the conversation end there. If you're in a like larger networking session, reach out to them again, be like, hey, it was great talking to you for a brief amount of time. We'd love to chat for at least 15, 20 more minutes. We can go a little bit more in depth. Oh, and the last thing I would say, it's also really obvious when you're in those group networking situations where if you're looking for recruiting for consulting, you oftentimes might be if the consulting company recruits at your college, where you are in a group situation, do not overpower anyone. Like again, it's about all about the personality and how you show off. Like if you're almost like the phrase that people often use, if you're trying too hard, it's really obvious because it just means that you're coming off as rude, arrogant. You're trying to take over a conversation. And sometimes it's just as important to ask the people in your group questions as it's important to ask the consultants themselves because it shows that you're a team player. I'm quickly scrolling through if any other ones with multiple things. All right, I see there's one with a couple likes where it's when should you start networking for consulting careers if you come from a non-target school? This is for internships or full-time roles. I would say there's no right answer. I think start networking like yesterday if you want to. If you're really something that you want to explore and do, you could be a freshman, which I would say, like, if you're a freshman in college, don't make consulting your only goal. Like, you don't pigeon yourself too early. You always explore other career opportunities as well. But like, if you want to understand what consulting is from someone, maybe alum or someone in the industry, like, reach out to them and just take it as a learning opportunity more than anything. And then being like, hey, like, I'm a biomedical engineer. I'm pretty much very healthcare, but I want to understand what you do on the business side of healthcare. Take it as a learning opportunity. You might realize like that's something you care about. And then other thing is, and that's where if we're gonna start networking early, that's the angle I would look at it. It's less about I want to get the interview right now. It's more about I just want to learn. But otherwise, like you can network always. I think take those conversations as like kind of learning conversations, not just oh like I'm trying to apply for a role. Like let me know what I can do. Yada yada. Just have a conversation and let it go from there. But you can start as early as possible. Okay, I see another one underneath it. How does BCG vary in the qualities it looks for in candidates and compares to other consulting companies? How does this company's culture and the way to purchase client work vary? So what I'm not going to say what exactly a different company's culture might be or how they because it's office specific, like the locate like Atlanta culture in general is very different than New York culture. I think unsurprisingly, the Southern culture might be a little bit uh, slower and hospitable than New York culture is a little bit more intense. But what I would say is that for BCG specifically, it's not too different in terms of what they're looking for in candidates than other companies. I think BCG might lean a little bit more in more kind of quant. I think there's more propensity to hire for someone from a quant background. What I've noticed is in the last couple years in Atlanta, but I don't think that's a very specific rule to any office. The company culture as well. Like I think people kind of say that there's a lot of difference from firm to firm. You might see like Bain is the classic things. Bain's the more fratty one. BCG is like the is a little bit more chill one. McKinsey's a little bit more intense one. But again, like it's just so different from person to person and firm to firm, location to location, that there's no right answer. What I would say, and again, that's also perspective, right? The stereotype is somewhat thought that and now it became a stereotype, but you might not necessarily agree after you talk to people. So the best way to really assess culture for the location you're recruiting to for the different firms is just reach out to folks and ask the questions that I mean, more like ask them what do they do on Thursday nights? Like, hey, like when your cohort hangs out together, associate or consultant cohort, what do you do? Some might say like, oh, like we like going to bars every Friday. Some might say like, oh, we like more like chill things. We'll do like a board game or we'll go on like weekend trips, whatever it is. Each of those things has like almost like a personality tied to it a little bit. Understand kind of what you want out of it. And then kind of make your decision from there. Because I think they'll give you a much better answer than I ever can on what that specific firm or location's culture is. All right, I'm gonna do one last question. I'm gonna see anything with multiple. Okay, I see. Okay, I see one as an analytics. I think analytics in term is same thing, tied to combinations between tech and business. I think that's a way to stand out for sure. Okay, I see a question from Ashton. Are there any books you've read that you gained a lot of value from? How they translated to your life or success within your career? I would say this: I'm not a huge reader, but I think if there's one book that, if it didn't come through already in the way I look at myself in my career, there's this book called Range. Um, and the whole point of Range is about how in this kind of world, and the world he uses like as a wicked world or a complex world, is having a versatile background or trying a bunch of different things out where you can learn from and picking things from is gonna take you farther in life than that. It was the antithesis to Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule. If you do the same thing over and over again, you become an expert. The idea was like, if you do something over and over again, give me an expert in one very specific thing, like chess or golf, where it's very repeatable. Most of the world is not that repeatable, especially in the business world where things are constantly changing. So that's something I believe in. I don't think it's necessarily something that's like by itself, like a career specific, like this is like how it's going to help me something specific, but it's more of a mindset type thing. And it's cool to hear something like someone validate that. Okay. I'm gonna answer the last one because I like this question. If I had to give one major factor that led to your success coming out of undergrad and breaking into your career, what would that be? One thing in undergrad, if you're an undergrad, try a bunch of different things out. The best way to learn is by actually doing it. You can always read about things, only learn about things. So that cool random project, like in the healthcare department, where they're like building a 3D printed prosthetic, sounds cool. See where you can plug in, or if you want to do something super random, just because you can do it. If you're especially freshman or sophomore, try that random internship out because you always have more times to learn something else. I think that's the biggest thing I can say is, and the second thing early in your career, say yes to whatever you can. Obviously look out for yourself. Like don't say like where you're like kind of like working 90 hours a week just because you said yes to every little thing and like overpromised. But even if it's out of your comfort zone, try to say yes, especially early in your career. Like consulting gives a really long leash early on to learn. You don't actually get evaluated, at least at BCG, until your 6 month mark, and which I think is the same exact thing for all other firms as well. And the 6 month mark is like a midpoint thing. Your first evaluation is a year after you start. So you have a really, really long like apprenticeship thing where they want you to try different things, want you to learn. So if you're an engineering person, say yes to like, hey, like I really want to build it, like lean into story building and building slides. If you're a really quant person, you're really good at the SQL coding and the modeling and that kind of stuff. I'm sorry, if you're the other way around, if you're like a liberal arts person and you're like, hey, like I'm really good at like the storyboarding, the design, kind of like thinking of like nebulous ideas and bringing it together, lean more into the modeling side. Like the quant stuff eventually is gonna, you ever do it at some point later on, might as well do it early and say yes to getting reps. And then people appreciate that as well. They're like, hey, there's someone that you can rely on. And it gets the same exact thing I was saying in undergrad. Like the more kind of versatile skills you can build early on, the more you can kind of have in your toolkit later on when the time comes. Okay. I know I kind of went like rapid fire right there. There's an Indian show called Coffee with Kern where they have like a rapid fire around it. That's what it felt like right there. But hopefully I answered a lot of questions. And if I didn't get to any questions or you want to continue talking, a quick little thing right here. It's a little plug, I would say. Feel free to kind of schedule some time with me, an intro call with me, for 15 minutes. We can use that call to answer a specific question that you might have that I didn't get to. Or if there's something you're gonna do, like, hey, like you're thinking about next steps, whether it's application or tackling networking or whatever it may be, we can talk there as well. I have a little discount code on the left hand side if that's applicable to relevant to you. But hopefully this was helpful. Again, always reach out. But otherwise, I wish you all the best of luck with consulting recruiting.